So, welcome to another episode of the Byron Compendium. This one is going to be our sort of jumping off point to what I consider, and I'm always apologizing to Byron for saying his high watermark. It's just a term I use, but as far as effort, creativity, other people being involved, the enormity of the project, we're going to present The Alien, the Rabbit, and the Monkey. Byron's this one and this one. I'll show you up close. A lot of effort went into this. It's my personal favorite album, and I'm sure a lot of people that will discover your musical universe will probably share my point of view just because of the enormous effort that went into it. So,
yeah, I certainly don't think that I'll ever make an album like that again under those sort of circumstances with the amount of people and the time that I inputted into this. This was over 4 years of in the studio, 5 years in the studio. Around that time, there was a lot of time. There was a lot of music that was made. There's a lot of stuff that didn't get released that we did, that I did with John Doerr, who owned the studio that I went and worked at. And yeah, I don't think that there's ever going to be a time that I'm going to also deal with such a change of technology. So this was the middle 90s. John Doerr, so I went to a studio called K-Sound. And at that time, I think computers, we were getting into sort of the second generation of computers, so be Windows 95. I always remember that sort of coming out around the time I was in the middle of doing the album.
Right, but John was a partner of mine, and we then split up, and because of where he was going to, I said, you should go see John, because John was a studio rat extreme. He was great. From everything in the studios, he could maneuver his way around. And I knew that his next effort would be best suited going to John's place. So John had what was called K-Sound, and as Byron mentioned, the Bite Down Hard album was all done on an Atari 1040 computer with Master Tracks Pro sequencing. Archaic. But just after we released into our closets Bite Down Hard, we started using Macs for stuff, because they were obviously user-friendly, very intuitive, and they were almost musical in the way you would use them. And of course Pro Tools worked on it, and that was another thing that we started glomming onto. So long story short, John was using the latest greatest Mac stuff, and that's when you came along.
Yeah, and we were just on the verge of going from analog tape. I think we were starting to record digitally. So things on the DAT tapes.
ADATs.
ADAT was in its infancy, so all the digital audio was recorded onto VHS tapes, Super VHS tapes, and so there was that sort of big change going on. I was excited about the opportunity. John wanted to do an album with me, and I was excited about my next opportunity at doing an album, and I had already started, after I finished working with you and doing Bite Down Hard, going to John's studio. John's studio had a different sort of vibe. John was always up with all the Macintosh. He was always, he was a real techie. He was always into like microphones, and he was very passionate about his studio stuff. And so his studio reflected it. He had it downstairs in his basement. He had a nice little recording booth and stuff like that, and he was predominantly working with a country act named Rick and Val. I believe they were a husband and wife team, and they did country stuff. And so John was working a lot of that. I would go over and listen to his recordings and stuff like that, and it was always sort of country stuff that he was playing. But it sounded really good, and I was excited because it was sort of I'd done my stuff with Steve. I was going to a new studio, and I sort of had started to write a whole pile of new songs based on sort of a premise that I had left our studio with. I had picked up a VHS copy of a movie from the 30s called Freaks.
Todd Browning's Freaks.
And it's totally his fault because he would get me onto that sort of into his world where he likes those. You always like, we have a familiar like, but I tend to think that I wouldn't have sort of brought that stuff out if you didn't like it as well. It was a great thing to share, and there was a couple of iconic people from that movie that you and I would mock as long as nobody was watching. There was the character Schlitzie. And,
Schlitzie the Pinhead.
Yeah, so they were sort of freaks.
Hydrocephalic or something, or a reverse of that, where their heads would turn into a little peak.
Yeah.
And they would obviously be at about, age 5, kind of.
Yeah, so they were mentally stunted and stuff like that. But, I mean, it's nothing like that we were inventing the wheel. The Ramones used Schlitzie as, and I think there are other bands previous to me that use those type of images in their...
the movie Freaks has been dissected a million different ways, and it's very overly used in certain dark circus themes, which is something we loved. I mean, we kept revisiting that dark circus, scary Lucifer, all that weird shit, even though we're pretty normal guys.
Yeah, pretty normal, but it's fun to sort of dive into those areas. That's what makes it entertaining for oneself. And I perceived it very early on that it was incredibly fertile ground to write a whole bunch of new songs with, a cast of characters. We are all sort of freaks in one sort of sense, finding our way through this world. And once I sort of got my head around the concept of Freak of Nature, which was sort of the go-to title of my next album. So
it was your working title, Freak
of
Nature.
My working title, but as soon as I got that around my head, everything else just sort of seemed to make sense, and it made it very easy to write for this album, write a lot of stuff, just for the sense of having a cast of characters and stuff like that. So the title, The Alien, the Rabbit, and the Monkey, is kind of a jive on Freaks. It's also sort of a jive on my mockery of titles due to Spinal Tap. It could be called Smell the Glove, as far as I'm concerned. That's sort of half the in-joke to me. But The Alien, the Rabbit, and the Monkey are sort of an in-joke about a lot of things. I've had people ask me before, and it's really about nothing, but it could be anything in your head. But I've had, since I did that album, I've had girlfriends that have asked me, have almost thought there was something nefarious behind that title and stuff like that. And I pleaded guilty. I had nothing nefarious about it other than it's a funny title, and it reminds me of just those type of album titles and stuff like that.
It always makes me think of 1958 joke at a Playboy party. So an alien.
Yeah. It'd be one of those. It'd be one of those.
Eyeballs are on me, boys.
Yeah, it'd be one of those. However, I do enjoy the title. I mean, it just sort of trips off kind of nicely. I was looking for something that just sort of tripped off nicely. So that was the premise that I went into. And I remember I wrote a whole pile of songs after my experience with Bite Down Hard. I certainly remember feeling a great freedom about, once I sort of clued into this just sort of loose title, a great freedom of what was, and this is one of the greatest things about sort of writing songs and stuff like that, especially when you think about the potential of what you can do. Not necessarily if you follow through it. Very few times I can follow through with what I think I can do, but when you think of the opportunities, once you get your head around it, it's very exciting and stuff like that. So for me, like when I get so excited about these things, I remember many sleepless nights because you just get hooked on writing things. Things get stuck in your head. You can't get to sleep because things are stuck in your head. You wake up in the morning with the same song that you were thinking about last night. So yeah, a lot of sleepless nights, but it's always an exciting time, writing stuff and just sort of experiencing sort of with John, sort of a new sort of person to work with, and all the sort of good and parts. John as a musician. I had very little experience previous to working with John as a musician. I know John Dewar had worked. He had played in bands previously. He played in a cover band called the Crowns. Would that be right? And so they were like a cover band, but they did their own stuff too and stuff. And they were pretty well renowned. Like they were a good hot band.
Well, every town has their few cover bands that go around and play and are respected a lot. They still play gigs now.
Yeah.
Gross was the leader of the Crayons. The official leader.
Yeah. They were really good.
And a lot of great musicians passed through the band.
Now John played what? What he would have played?
Well,
guitar?
I remember when I saw him, because he had a couple of different incantations with the Crayons, and one time I said he was playing bass.
Yeah, that makes sense. So John is one of those guys when he plays guitar. So at the time, I sort of felt, sort of wishing, I can say it now, having somebody to produce my stuff or to edit my stuff seems very obvious to me now when I look at my work. Having an editor there to make my ideas more concise and get to the essence of what I was doing. You know, what I say, I put on 100 instruments on every song, but really when I take away all the 100 instruments, I get to the essence of the song. And sometimes I wonder, why did I put 100 instruments on the song and stuff like that? John never came across to me like that. Technically, he I don't think he could chart music or anything like that. I mean, in my head, I'm sort of wanting some sort of musicality that is sort of grounded in musical basics, something that could somebody that would maybe be more absolute in how they think about getting my stuff down to the essence. John was more wanderlust. And I think you could see that in his playing. He was a really good guitar player, but he could never play the same thing. If you asked him to do a take of something, you asked him to play the same thing again, he could never do it. He was very sort of wanderlust in his approach and stuff like that. And so like there were those sort of musical issues that I don't think I was sort of on my own little planet anyways. So regardless, I don't think it would have taken somebody. I was still searching for somebody to help me get my songs concise, and I don't think John was that guy. But however, John facilitated a lot of other things for me.
See, and that's interesting from an artist's point of view, because from a listener point of view, strictly, it coalesced into a really cool vision that has the Byronic elements, but John has that something that he can pick out a theme in there and polish it really, really nicely. Like, as you're talking, as a semi-studio guy myself, I always thought it's interesting because if there's unlimited amount of tracks and they say, okay, flugelhorn, put a part down. And as you add parts, you could start taking parts off here, and the song just turns into different things all the time. Like you say, if you just take out all the instruments except for 3, and then next time take a different 3, you got 2 different songs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just, for someone like Byron who isn't short of ideas, you would just keep going. I always loved in the studio, you know, how big your studio is. I'm sure people that produce have this all the time. You say to the band, are we done? And you know, if you're letting them self-produce, and they always say, how many more tracks do we have? You say, well, it's 3. And they go, okay, Joey, we can put another guitar part on, and then we can put the tambourine on. Then that doesn't constitute a finished song. So I thought John was very good at that, of tidying up people that are crazy, you know, idea-laden. He was good at tidying that up.
Well, he was good for what he just kept feeding the beast. So he just kept throwing ADAT machines at me. So one day we would have, so the ADAT machine would have 8 tracks on it. So next day there'd be 2 ADAT machines and they'd be all synced up. Next day he would get some computer that could run the 2 ADAT machines, and you could have them run at different times. A week later, I'd show up. He'd have 3 ADAT machines, and now I have 24 tracks to screw around with. And then, like this would, or he'd be going, I have this guy coming in this week, and I'm going to give him some extra studio time, but he's promised he'll give you 10 minutes of his time to play and stuff like that. So he's constantly feeding the beast and constantly trying to get me to do something. So it was wonderful in one way. If it was feeding me food, I would have been 800 pounds by the end of this album. Mm-hmm. He was constantly going in that direction. But yeah, I was just sort of talking about John's Wanderlust, just sort of musicality. So he sort of had or how I perceived it, just watching him play guitar and stuff like that. It was just sort of Wanderlust. However, he was that guy that you and I go to parties with, and who knows the freaking back catalog of every Western pop song ever done. Mm-hmm. He can sit there and play every song. He knows all the knows the chords. He'd be the kind of guy that you'd be at the bonfire out on the beach that would be playing everything. He's got no problem doing all that stuff. We had talked about that. Just I'm the complete opposite. I couldn't play you a song today if I tried. I don't know anybody's song. I don't even know my own song. I can only play you what I played last night, which is a song I'm working on. That's sort of in my ballpark right now. But yeah, so John had this sort of wanderlust. And I always remember previously playing in bands. For instance, I played in a band with a guy named Richard Evans, who was a keyboardist. He went to Toronto. He ended up being a keyboardist in, I guess, some Broadway shows, and even Keyswalder. So these guys are sort of mired in, they knew how to write music down, and they knew all about the sort of musical, and they knew the mathematics of music. And I always could find myself being drawn to them, just because I'd be going, is this chord right?
It's like they speak a language that's different.
Yeah, and I'd always have questions for them when I was playing with them, like, how, is this a running note? Is this a passing note? Am I doing this right? Yeah. Or setting up chords for singing and stuff like that. Yeah. Am I screwing this up? And they always knew which note where to go and stuff like that. Yeah. John, that was sort of not John's department. So to be fair to him, that was sort of.
Right, but I don't think he'd ever admit that.
Yeah, I don't think that was John's department, but I just sort of felt, so I was just sort of off again, this crazy guy, and being fed all this food and stuff like that. So I felt still very unbridled going in and stuff like that. So. How many minutes are we? 30 minutes in or something like that?
No.
Maybe we keep going.
No, you got more time, baby.
Okay. Right. So we had this freak of nature thing going on, and I remember the first few times at John's. There was a confidence that I had going into it this time that I didn't have previously, because I'd never done sort of a real album and I'd never done an album with another human being beside me. So just sort of having that confidence of going in and doing this other stuff.
Well, validation of I'm no dummy, but I worked with a lot of people, and John knew of your abilities, and I think when I'm just guessing for you that working with me for all that time, going, yeah, what I'm doing, I'm not crazy. It's okay. I can put it out, and people aren't going to go, ha ha ha, you don't know what you're doing. That was always a great fear of Byron's, having people laugh at him. Don't laugh at me.
Yeah, actually, that's a song on Alien, the Rabbit, and the Monkey. Eh? Yeah.
No, don't laugh at me, because I'll break down and cry is from Mitt Lieb on.
Oh wow! Okay, all right. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it.
You always expose yourselves. We all. I don't write lyrics, but I would assume that any lyricist that's true to himself has to expose the inner demons and the inner questions and all that stuff. The classic songwriter struggling with his inner demons. It's true. It's true. You do reveal.
So I just have these great things. So John's first house. So actually, the studio moved into 3 places. But John's first house was on Hawthorne Avenue.
10A Hawthorne.
So at the time, I was in my early 30s, I remember, and I was driving a sports car at the time. I had a sports car, playing a lot of hockey. Driving
RX-7 or something?
Yeah, I had an RX-7. So I'm driving an RX-7.
Here's a picture.
driving an RX-7. I'm this young lad playing tons of hockey and going to Hawthorne Studio, which is just, if you don't live in Ottawa...
K-Sound, not Hawthorne.
Yeah. You go up the parkway along the canal, which is...
The Pretoria Bridge, the one that lifts...
Which is gorgeous. It's a gorgeous part of Ottawa.
Right by the Black Cat Cafe.
Yeah, and so it was just a very exciting time to be Byron Edwards, I think, to be making an album and playing hockey and getting to do all this. I remember just being extremely happy and, again, the potential of all these songs at the start. When you're at the start of any sort of thing, there's so many possibilities, and that's what makes it so exciting. And I think that's half sort of the fun for me doing all this stuff. And so at John's place, I do remember, looking after his place. This is how long ago, and they had the O.J. Simpson car chase on. So whatever year that was, I remember.
That was in the 90s.
Yeah. Well, that's when we started.
That's true. Yeah. Okay. So it'd be like, I guess 96, 97 when you're starting up. But it was a 4-year odyssey. I remember that.
So
it did cover the last part of the 90s.
So I do remember doing a lot of demos at John's first studio. So a demo would be me and the guitar and maybe a drum machine, and I start laying down a quick vocal and a guitar part just to give him an idea of a few songs that I was working on. Turns out that a lot of the demos that I first did at a studio were almost perfect vocally. And I always remember, so this was the start of me learning to record my vocals right away instead of having a guitar and singing my vocals. But there were a couple songs that I did that we'll be hearing in the next few weeks that the vocals were first take and were, to my ears, practically perfect. And I could not duplicate or replicate my first take vocals. So this is a memory I have of first working at John's studio. I could not duplicate my first takes that I demoed.
Singing and playing?
Yeah, that's how I demoed them. It was just easier for me. I remember having this guitar, and I remember there was one song called Tripnotic I did that you ended up playing drums on. So I demoed that.
Drum machine.
Yeah, and I remember I did a couple verses, and I could not. The vocal track that you hear is not the vocal track that I did first take, and the first take was beyond perfect for me. There was a complete excitement you could hear, because John would be the guy. So John would also set up the studio when I'm going in to do a demo. He would turn the lights down. He would put a candle in the friggin' sound booth. He had a very sort of woodsy feel down in his Hawthorne studio. So it was always mood setting and stuff like that. And yeah, I remember doing those demos, and you can hear the excitement in my voice about fucking yeah. And he'd have a Neumann microphone, some German microphone, tube microphone, and he'd have me set up like I was the ace or the king of the hill.
I think he knew how you like to do your stuff, and he would indulge you, and that's great.
He did. He absolutely did. And it was wonderful. I just remember being so excited. It felt so good to be in a soundproof thing with the candle and singing your songs.
Well, it's interesting for me because, as I say, I exit the scene for a few years. We talk now and then about how it's going and all. Me also understanding Byron's psyche, working with John for 10 years at the time, or more than that. I knew John's psyche, and I was excited to see what would come out of it, knowing how creative Byron is, how musical and able John was in the studio. I thought, this is going to be great. Or they're both going to be lying dead with guns in the basement, and that's how we're going to find them. But that's a lot of musical, creative things that are like that. You're this, and then you're best buddies, and then you're this. I mean, that...
So I was under no auspices when I went in. I had a couple. John is very headstrong, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that in a negative. I'm not making any sort of yings or yangs about it. John was very sort of headstrong. A couple people who knew of him, and he sort of warned me to watch him, how headstrong he was. But my experience with him, he sort of reminded me of my father a bit, very sort of headstrong as well, and very sort of a slight narcissism. So he reminded me of that, but I tended to feel that John had a baseline of respect for my musicality, and we enjoyed.
100%, I can tell you.
We enjoyed being together, and I respected what he could give me, and I sort of got where he was, and he was entertaining. John could be one of the most charming persons you've ever met in your life, and so could of my dad. So I've met these type of people before. So it was wonderful to be with, and I think we were both excited by the songs I had brought, and I think he was looking for a catalyst in his studio so he could really stretch his studio things. I think he really wanted to do some important studio stuff, and so I was sort of his way to get there, and likewise with him, he was like we both benefited from the relationship, and that there was a respect there, and I enjoyed most of my time there with John. It was a wonderful time.
Like you said, I don't want to go on with John Dewar because hey, you know what? He was a great guy and very good in the studio. But I want to get back to the musical part of it because whether it's me or John, we require, like I think any studio guy, if they're not that themselves, like I said, if Paul McCartney, he's not a technical guy. Maybe he is. I'm just saying he's definitely creative. Right, and there's a George Martin guy who goes, "This is how we twiddle the knobs and get the way we want, or bring in the guys to get what you want." That was exactly the situation. I think it really, really benefited both of you, like it benefited me to have you with me at the time. But these were rungs on a ladder for you. We were tools basically to get somewhere. What I wanted to ask earlier, just because this is just strictly on a creative sense now too. We all create in a certain way. Like I'm wondering, these fantastical songs that you bring out, do you have them like envision the way we are now that we know them, or do you just say here's a nugget of something, I don't know where it's going?
I would say not everything's the same. I don't want to make any broad brush strokes, but I search in the ether for something to get me started with something, and then I don't know where it's going to go, and I think that's part of the excitement about putting songs together. I could be of two minds. I have always had this ability to lie in bed before I go to sleep, and I can sort of construct a song in my head and fall asleep to it. I can just sort of make it up as I go along. I can orchestrate it in my head if I want. But I don't when I write. I'm constantly, so when I pick up a guitar or I get a keyboard and I'm trying to write a song, I'm sort of playing some chords and I'm just trying to catch something in my head, something that's going to be floating, something's going to connect in my head, and it's going to be a nugget, and at that point then I have to massage that nugget. And I just sort of follow where that nugget takes me, and I think that's always been my part of my enjoyment about putting stuff together. Is no, I don't have any preconceived. That's why it's so fun to bring other people into a song I've already done, because people take me other places in my song that I would not have thought of.
But we all know these musicians will come in and say, "So what are you looking for?" And I know Byron would be more likely to say, "I don't want to tell you. I'm going to play it. It's an A. Go."
Yeah, I've always been of the mind that if I bring somebody else in, I just want them to bring their talent to fore. Most of what I hear in my head or what I want to make, I can sort of figure it out how to do it myself. I can sort of get from point A to point B. If I can think of a point B, I can sort of get myself musically there with an instrument. But when I have another human being there, I want them to bring their thing. I want their talent. I want them to bring. I don't want them to play what I expect in my head that they should be playing. Now that's That's different for classical people. Classical people sort of require you, they're more minute in how they look at things. They want the notes, they want you to write it down for them.
And it's math more than,
yeah.
I don't want to say math more than music because they're brilliant musicians, but...
Right, so I would just write the notes down and I would put no sort of, what they do between the notes, then I would say that's up to you. A lot of musical scores have the notes written, the math written, and then they have whether to play things slowly or quickly or stuff like that. That's the artistry of classical people. But generally for people, yeah, I definitely want them to put their talent in. There's no reason for me to bring you in and say, play it like, here are the notes, play it like I can do it myself. Yeah, I would always do it for you to bring your stuff into it. So anyway, blah.
Interesting. You know, I don't write full compositions, so I'm always, this spark of creativity is always interesting to me. Like you said, of what I would see of Byron, we'd be working on certain songs at our time together, and he'd always be, whenever we weren't working that song, he'd pick up a guitar and he'd be going through 2 chords and he'd just be going over them, and I could see it, the machines in his head. And I always found that so interesting. You know, that moves into the talk of too about your favorite piece. I mean, I never like to ask the artist themselves what's their favorite song, because truthfully that doesn't mean anything to me, because your favorite song is what you're working on right now, right? It's always the most fresh and cool and exciting, whether I believe that or not. But I would be on the side of the mass of humanity, right, against you, the artist. So artists always like their most recent thing. I don't think they're the best judges all the time of their own stuff.
No, I wouldn't be. For me to re-listen, which I do now, I go over my hard drives. I'm going over tons of stuff I haven't heard that I've done. While I do find it somewhat interesting hearing stuff that I don't even remember that I've done, I certainly am not any judge to say these are the best songs. Certainly my enjoyment comes from being in the middle of doing something, and that's where I sort of go, there's no reason for me to listen to something I've already finished. I just move on.
It is a weird time, because I know when we finished Bite Down Hard, I was excited because we had an album done, it was finished, but I was totally bummed out. It's over. It's like reading a book, like watching a movie you really enjoy, something that you go, I wish I could go back to the start again and do that again. I mean, you got to with The Alien, the Rabbit, and the Monkey. So maybe with that, what I'm thinking is, you know, we talk about it so much. I'm preparing an episode where it's just the full album, but maybe next one, let's play the first song for the hell of it. Okay, let's get into it. So that'll be second half today.
But it's interesting that you remembered to press play, because such a simple thing, being in a studio is pressing play. But there are times, and I still feel very anally connected by this thing, that I have to make sure when I'm recording I've pressed play, because still to this day there are moments when I'm recording, and it's not very regular because I'm so consumed with making sure I press play and record. Sometimes I forget to press play and record, and so I'll have sung this song or played some bass and it sounds like $1 million, only to turn around and find out that I did not press the record button.
Does that happen often?
No, not at all. But I still to this day make sure that just the act that you did about pressing play, because you've talked about a few times that we've done this show, and you've made a joke at the end that you didn't have it on record and stuff like that. But I still, it just reminds me of those times that, still to this day, I've missed some performances because I haven't pressed play or record. Have you ever had those things in the...
Well, yeah, I'm sure other people can feel common to this idea, that I work both on PC and Mac, and the keystrokes are, like, the shortcuts are different.
Right.
I try to do as much as I can through here. And the fact that I don't want to say what I love most about Mac, but I love the preview function. Hit your space bar, you can preview audio, video, anything. Boom, there it is. PC doesn't do that, right? Like they have a preview in their window pane, like, but it's different. Keystrokes are different, so I find myself hitting certain quick cuts on the opposite computer and going, "What did I just do?" Because it's a whole different thing. Just going undo whatever it was. Anyways, I into something different.
Yeah, I always say it because it's just something to this day. I'm just constantly aware of making sure that I press play and record when I'm about to do a performance, because I don't think nothing disappoints me as much as when you do something and it's not recorded. And,
can you imagine how many episodes we could do of like great bands that they're great takes? The engineer's sitting there. I've done it sometimes. You don't want in the middle of a take stop it and the guy's doing something great. But if you're not recording, you're just sweating it out, going, make a giant mistake or something right now.
Oh, absolutely.
The guy does it perfect.
Yeah, and you've heard of stories where things have been accidentally erased, and I've heard of. There were a couple of issues in the studio. I've heard of other people where. Huge tracks, I think the studio that Sound on One Hand Studios, where John's studio, that they had an issue once where they had recorded the bands, and the bands had all the stuff on a hard drive, and they didn't have enough room, so the next session came in and erased and it wasn't backed up, and so the whole. Yeah, it's just terrible as far as sort of in the recording sphere, that just the most fundamental things like play and record, sometimes you miss, and yeah, it's just not a good thing. It's a big disappointment.
Yeah, when you're doing the album, especially a lower level artist that doesn't have millions of fans waiting for stuff, but as a lower level artist, you want to always keep your stems and all the original things for possible reuse. But, back in the day before hard drives and all, it was storing these 2-inch tapes. It took a lot of space. And, they were susceptible to all the, environmental conditions of anything else. You think of the storage space that took. I know that when John and I were doing... just the last year or so of our studio time together, we had moved into Mac stuff, and we bought one of the first ever Mac external hard drives you could buy. It was 1 gigabyte, I believe, and it was about this big, and it was like $2,000. But then all you were storing was like sequence stuff. It really wasn't, your sample stuff or mixes, endless stems, endless.
Right. So it's interesting you said that. So when I finished Bite Down Hard, now I don't remember ever having the analog tape with me, but what I do have, or the sort of all the stuff that I ended up with, was a lot of floppy disks, which probably had a lot of MIDI information. And I have some DATs. I noticed I was cleaning out this morning a box, and I have some Bite Down Hard DATs. So they're about the size of this mouse.
Yeah. Micro cassettes. So.
Yeah, micro cassettes, and that's how they store their zeros and ones and stuff like that.
And that was for data or for mixes?
The mixes were done on those DATs. I found 2 DATs this morning.
Sometimes people save just the data on it, like.
No, it's got it's got the mixes, and it's probably got that intro that we've always talked about. That's at the start of Bite Down Hard. That's got the instrumental intro. It's harpsichord. It's based on This Is Not Emily. I told you. Do you have a DAT player?
No, not really.
Okay, so without getting married, we always talked about that. There was a start to Bite Down Hard. It was the instrumental was the middle 8, and John always mocked it, and that's why we took it out ultimately. And I remember you saying you should keep it in because he wants you to get it out.
I believe that. All sounds legit.
Okay, but
I can't remember that part.
Talking about the it's just the middle 8. It's just the middle 8. Played by we just used the harpsichord part, and that's how it started because it sounded so cool. It sounded like a small little what's those like with the dancing figurine and like a small music box. Yeah, right, that's what it sounded like. It sounded like a music box.
Oh, that sounds cool.
However, this Alien, the Rabbit, and the Monkey, just talking about like all the stuff that you end up with. So this album was done on ADATs, and so ADATs were basically VHS tapes. So you took this over the studio at the end. I literally had hundreds of tapes left over.
You mean tapes. When I eventually took over Sound on One Hand?
Yeah, I'm just saying the end of the album consumed maybe 100 VHS tapes. There was a massive amount, wasn't there?
Well, I remember, Nick, when I took over the studio,
there was a whole closet full.
Not just your stuff.
Yeah.
I remember for months calling bands and saying, you want your stuff? But it was endless. And I don't know how many of yours were in there, but you came and got them, didn't you?
I did. But anyways, yeah. And today, you put all your stuff on hard drives. So, that's the good thing about it.
You should, at some point, transfer everything to digital. I know you won't do it, but you really should.
Yeah, at some point, for sure. Fact that we got Bite Down, Hard Down on, that's a good thing.
One thing I know about your time with John and the way John was going, he was a little bit of a mix hoarder. He felt no mix was beyond not keeping. You know what I'm saying? Like, he didn't waste anything. So there would be endless DAT tapes as well of alternate mixes. I have a couple of folders of alternate Alien, Rabbit, and the Monkey mixes.
Yeah, and with a lot of VHS tapes, I have seems to have boxes of CDs with that kind of stuff written on it, stuff like that.
Well, I was just going to start this whole second half with just playing song one, just so we can just jump into it.
Go for it.
So we're going to do that now. This
I
is
haven't heard it in a minute.
The title track from
The Alien, the Rabbit, and the Monkey. The Alien, the Rabbit, and the Monkey. The Alien, the Rabbit, and the Monkey.
Here we go. That's right. I'm just going to play it. We can listen to it here. So whatever. Oh my God, where is it? I hope it's here. So let's take a listen, everybody.
It must be the weekend because it's raining.
Well, it must be the weekend because it's raining. I can hear the pitter-patter off the roof. I guess it just hurt me. And the thunder crashes down, baby.
There's horns on this.
Well, I turn over and she's there asleep. I don't think I've ever seen such a beautiful girl. She's come to this sweaty, muddy stone. Out, it's another working day. I've been pulling at the plum and then she sighs. What a good boy I've been. Who said this was the tavern's horse to ride? I was kind of thinking, monkey-ness.
It's kind of cool.
Where the hell am I with this?
Oh, this is good.
This is the greatest thing.
Mom didn't.
There you go. Sorry, John. I don't mean to cut you off. Just we got to get back to it. So that was that was the title track. There's a lot to consume there. I've always, the interesting thing is there was about 4 years that I was out of touch with John and you, and after 4 years or so, I get this phone call out of the blue from John, and we both know John, so I'm thinking, what's up here? Is he coming for revenge or something? And he says, you should come over to my place. I've got something you need to hear. This is out of the blue. And okay, so I go over, and before any intros or anything, re-intros after a long, long time, I just sit down on his couch, and he starts playing this. This is the first thing I hear. So, sorry to take the whole sort of steam off the beginning of this, but this is where this long question for me became, at the very beginning of the song, this long intro, you hear this crazy weird thing. That's what they have deemed called the antelude.
Yes, the antelude. The antelude, John, I think, did the whole thing according to the...
Well, what's funny is this. Also, the lyrics were all different order, and I was having a hard time following it myself. And of course, we're always looking at the credits.
So I'm kind of like listening to this. It was cool to listen to. It's actually got other people playing on it, which is fun. It's got a great bass part. A lad named Tom McMahon.
Playing a stick.
Yeah, he played a stick.
Tony Levin made.
Do they
famous.
still play sticks? Is that a big thing?
Apparently. I mean, it's such a cool instrument.
And that's got like 6 strings on it?
It's got 10.
It's got 10 strings,
It's like a guitar bass, and you only play it by tapping. And
That's right. He would, he was a Tom McMahon, awesome bass player. But these bass players with... what do you say, 12 strings, 6 strings, 8 strings? He had
on
10
the
strings.
stick?
Yeah, on the stick, 10 strings.
I think you probably get different configurations of them.
Yes.
I'm not a stick expert, so
But he's all up at the fret, sounding like a guitar player, and I remember just trying to get him to play it a bit lower and stuff like that.
So this he was playing this higher before?
He tended to have those. I think when he wasn't sort of shticking on my stuff, he was sort of playing up there, but I was getting him. He also played stand-up, and I just seeing his name, he was doing stand-up. But your question...
to me, it's a very... not because it's stick, but it is a Peter Gabriel-ish low end for me. Maybe because it's a stick, and Tony Levin played it with Gabriel all the time, and it sounds familiar to a Gabriel kind of bass line.
Right, so that was around, when did Gabriel do So? When did he do that So album? All that stuff. But all that stuff was going on, in the ether and stuff like that. I'm curious as to who played drums on this. It doesn't seem to say.
It doesn't say, but if you ask me, it'd be Bob Bangs. It sounded very... Bob was so precise of a drummer, and he interpreted music so well because he was a writer, and so that sounds like a Bob Bangs drum part.
So Bob Bangs was a gentleman that I met through John. He had worked with John previously. Bob played with the Crayons.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bob played with everybody.
Okay. Bob played with everybody. Bob was a drummer. Bob was super, super talented. So this
Bob Bangs.
Yeah. So this is sort of my introduction to just having these great musicians always just sort of coming in and around and stuff like that. So Bob Bangs was a drummer, a great singer, awesome singer, and loved the Beatles and stuff like that. And he was into playing some drums, so he plays throughout this album. But just super talented. I didn't really have to tell him much. He was sort of a quiet guy, and he sort of got the shtick anyways. So no doubt Bob played drums on this. But your question is the anteludes. The antelude, I don't think you should know about.
Woo! Hang on a second.
It's. I don't think.
I'm on a need-to-know basis with the antelude.
I think it's only John and I.
Yeah,
that's a little joke that we had before we actually started recording this. No, the antelude was an instrument that somebody had invented Now I forget. As
Every
I came in here,
instrument somebody's invented. What are you talking
obviously,
about? Like a recent thing?
So the analogue is not a person. The analogue is an instrument.
Oh yeah, okay. That's what I figured.
Yeah. Somebody that John knew had invented this thing called an analogue, and I'm trying to remember who invented it or put it together. It was essentially a lot of strings. I don't know whether it had a fret on it. But I think that's that sort of sitar, stuff. And they call it the analogue.
So this guy played it?
I think John had the instrument, and he just sort of did that sort of stuff.
Yeah, he came up with something neat sounding on it. So what did it look like? I mean...
It was like a Rube Goldberg sort of contraption. Rube Goldberg. So
I know what you're talking about.
You know, the mousetrap thing or something like that. So
it doesn't help me visualize it anymore.
I have very faint recollections of it. I don't think you could...
Like a dulcimer or an auto
sort
harp?
of like that, kind of like that. I don't...
he'd slide with the pick?
I have vague memories of it, other than I enjoyed the title or the name of it more than I did.
It sounds awesome. The analogue. It sounds like an alien race.
Yeah, and I think that's why I kept it on, because it was just a funky name and stuff like that.
Ray Bradbury.
Yeah.
So
I'm listening to this. So it would have sounded wonderful playing live. I'm sort of listening to this. There's also a real live horn section on here.
The Jive Wires.
So there was a band called the Jive Wires in the 90s and stuff like that. So they were sort of
for a long time.
A blues R&B. Like they have like a big, like, were they a big band or were they just...
I'm sorry, Jive Wires. I don't they've been playing. I think they even may still in some incantation play around Ottawa. But they've been a great musical act for a long time. And just because of that, I know that they would have been recording on people's stuff. So I'm sure that through the studio, John says, I have a guy that I'd like you to come in and play on. But really, really good sounding. Like, you know, they're good players, and John would have recorded them with the most beautiful microphones in wonderful rooms, right?
Yeah, so this was sort of a gig. So having a horn section was always sort of a thing that we knew we were going to do at the very end of the album. We were going to record it, and then we were going to get the horn section in for a day. So the Jive Wires, I'm looking at the names here. So Steve Burnt, he was the guy that he charted all these horn sections stuff. Steve, I believe, played trombone. Now, I see two other names here in the Jive Wires. I see Bill Rowett, who played trumpet, and I see Sandy Gordon, who was a sax player. Both those people used to play in a band in the 80s called the Blue Current Preserve Swing Band, which played at Elgin Street. Rebecca Campbell was the singer there. It was sort of a 20s inspired thing and stuff like that. And they used to have a practice space in the glebe, and when I was in a band with JP and Steve, that's where we used to practice in the living room. We used to, that's where we would go and practice, and those people were always sort of floating around. Sandy Gordon was super talented. Bill Rowett was a great trumpet player. Another guy named Brian Magner. Now, I think Brian was a trumpet player. I might be wrong. But, So that was a sort of a very exciting thing to actually... I think at the time, after my experience in Bite Down Hard, wanted to get a lot more live real instruments in since we had the studio and we had the capability. So it's not like every day we would... call people in. It was usually people that would come into the orbit, and you'd sort of, if you were going to finagle stuff from, John always was really good about these people. For instance, the Jive Wires, he might have given the Jive Wires a deal in his studio.
Well, that's the currency, right?
And
musicians are cool. Like, they want to play in your stuff, you know, so...
Yeah, so...
give them an hour of free time. I don't think it's anything that is unnatural in studios. It's just the neat synchronicity of really talented people with great gear and neat ideas. Like, that's the holy trinity.
Yes, again, it was a wonderful experience to have all these things around you to
Sorry, Steve on his own charted the song for you?
Yes.
Did you say to him, these are the hits I want?
Well, at some point we picked a couple songs. I think I met with Steve, and I told him sort of the idea I was looking for, and I think we might have gone over a few minute things. But I again said, this is not really rocket science, because there was nothing specific that I was looking for. I was just looking for him. He seemed to be a cat that wanted to put his 3 cents in. Just from talking to him, I just sort of was trying to figure out how much he was willing to sort of musically invest, and he seemed to be fine with me just sort of saying, I'm just looking for some horn hits and some stuff around here, and the song, stuff around here. These guys, they're augmenting the music. Mm-hmm. There wasn't any specific sort of melody that I was asking them to play. I think there's one song we'll come up with that I might have been specific, but generally they're just a lot of shots, James Bond shots, stuff like that. He got the shtick, so
did he ever?
I just sort of let him just sort of do it. And we're in a recording studio, so like whatever they give us, we can duplicate, we can triplicate, we can move it around. I'm just happy to get them to do it, and I'm more concerned that he's happy sort of doing this shtick, and I don't want to limit him in any sort of way that's going to freak him out or anything like that. So
I loved
just sort of go for it.
Like I say, well mic'd stuff, played well, cool parts. It kind of reminds me of in Heartbreaker, Rolling Stones. That's the tone I get from this. Almost Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Lucretia McKeevill, if you know this song, or something like that. What you've done on this album, you and John, whoever, the whole, everybody stirring the pot, created perfect, for me, period pieces of things, This was a really neat late 80s, 90s Peter Gabriel groove. I mean, it's so great. Now, because people are going to be asking, because they're seeing this like we're seeing this, there's a credit there for Squish, credited to Squish.
Squish was Tracy. Tracy worked toward the end of the album. Tracy was a sound engineer. Mm-hmm. Tracy Holmes. And Tracy was John's. Tracy was just came out of music college or sort of
Fanshawe or something
like
or
that.
Trebas.
Yeah, one of those sort of. So she was getting. She got an opportunity to help mix this album and just all the things that goes with it and stuff like that. So yeah, her name was. I don't know why we ended up putting Squish on it. I don't know why I ended up putting Squish on it.
Well, if I remember much from you guys at this point, everything was an inside joke. You had to be in on it.
Yeah, I no doubt. There's a lot of there's a lot of inside jokes for what it's worth that goes through it and stuff like that. I don't know how relevant they are to anybody today. So that sort of tells you about inside jokes, right? They only have an expiry date for sure.
There's a million different ways to look at this song, this album, the artwork and everything, because at this time I was working at that company, Healy Disc Manufacturing. We were very, very good at graphic arts, manufacturing CDs, that whole shtick. So one of the graphic artists at our company was Terry Wiskin, really talented female graphic artist, and she was always into anything very artistic. And so at this point, even though John and I weren't working together, I still did work for his record label, right? What was it again? I'm sorry, what was the record? Why am I blanking?
Dark Skippy?
Dark Skippy, which is a whole story on its own, Dark Skippy. But anyways, John had Dark Skippy Records. And so we would produce the albums for him, do the artwork, mass produce the CDs. So the album was finished, came into Healy Disc, and we assigned Terry to the graphic design, and she came up with a lot of this on her own. This whole, you'll be seeing, I'm sure you're seeing it as we're playing the songs. She came up with this whole concept, and it's really great. She's so creative. I love her work. And but I do believe that it would be mostly coming from John. You would be submitting lyrics to him, but he's pretty well driving the boat, which is the credits and stuff here.
Yeah, I don't remember any of this. I'm sort of looking at the lyrics and stuff like that. So the chorus has got that.
There's a chorus.
Well, the chorus, it's where the band kicks in with the organ, and the organ is something that's cool to me listening to it again, because I know that the organ part was played through a Leslie speaker. So at the time that was a big thing. I remember just having a Leslie speaker and just getting that dirty sort of.
You've always been a stereo freak, like extremes.
Yeah, and for sure, and having that rotating Leslie speaker sound was great. So, like, I'm looking at the lyrics. This sweaty, muggy stew. I like it like that. My itchy trigger finger salamander on a hot cherry pie.
My itchy trigger finger salamander.
The alien, the rabbit, and the monkey. So it's beat poetry, right? It's like almost like a rap, just sort of rapping out a beat and stuff like that. It's wonderful.
As a fan, I've always noticed that your lyrics always work in a really cool cadence. You know, you're not really a Frank Sinatra guy. It's more like and I hate saying it's like this, it's like that, but why am I blanking on the Beatles song?
Well, to me, if you're asking me, like, what really, I like the sort of arabesque of, and not like I come anywhere close and stuff like that, but something that I always sort of strive for. I was a big fan of Cole Porter, and he sort of had this this flow to his lyrics where he was just sort of was almost like mindless scattershot that was just going on and on. And he had a great arabesque, as I call it, lyrical arabesque, and I've always sort of thought that's the place to sort of strive and stuff like that.
Yeah, like I Am the Walrus. That's what I was looking at, because it's very percussive vocally, and that's what this is.
Interesting about I Am the Walrus, how John was inspired by that was from a police siren. So it's going dee 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 dee. So I am here as you are here as you are me, and we are all together. So that's how what inspired him. Sort of that. Sorry, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I'm
sorry.
Joking. Doesn't matter.
I am.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's how he got it. Yeah.
Well, that is so cool.
Yeah. I must say I'm really kind of chuffed by my last album, and again looking at this next album, I'm just sort of chuffed by looking at all the lyrics.
It's so funny for me because I'm always pumping up the album when I'm wanting people to listen to it. You throw it on, typically, because I do love the pacing of the album. I think it's I know you and John put a lot of thought into the pacing of the album, and I've heard other versions, and I guess because I'm so used to this particular pacing that I can't get used to other ones now. But when I put it on for people, I always put on song 1 because I think, boy, you'll like this because it moves along. But because that intro part goes for like a minute and a half, inevitably Cooper's saying, this is what you've built me up to listen to this interlude for 2 minutes.
Yeah. Well, it's like we said. We said a few things ago. Now pop songs, the chorus is the first 15 seconds of the song that you listen to.
Get them quick.
Yeah, get them quick.
But you have always done dynamic stuff, and so it's a refined taste, I believe, and...
Yeah, so if I did that song again today, I would never have an opening like that for that length of time.
And I don't know if it would be as good, because, now knowing the effect, the overall effect...
Yeah, so I still enjoyed listening to it. I had no bearing on my time, but I guess I guess to each his own.
It's interesting too because it's a neat example how when it goes from the artist straight through to graphic arts and all, how the graphic artist a lot of times hasn't heard the album yet because it's brand new. They might give them a track or two, but they're just given lyrics. And that's the way it goes. But then, in between the singer singing it and the graphic artist dropping it on paper. I always found that about some albums that I loved growing up. I get, because the Beatles started printing their lyrics, and how you go, wait a second, that's it. It doesn't. Wow, here it is down here. Isn't that funny? Like, I always wonder where that mix-up comes from.
I'm enamored with my with the look of my lyrics again. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's just wonderful to look at.
Yeah, and even myself, because these, like I told you, these songs all live in the pantheon of my experience. That I'm still finding little lyrical bits and stuff that. Oh, really? Is that what you're saying?
So that what I call the chorus with the organ part and stuff like that. There's also sort of that other sound that I live with, and that Casio, that clavinet. I love the clavinet. I don't use it anymore now, but back then I remember the Casio had a lot. I played you a lot of stuff that had a clavinet sound. So that's sort of like early '70s. That's my growing up with Stevie Wonder and stuff for sure. I wish I could play it properly, but that's where all that stuff comes from. I enjoy listening to that.
One thing I'd like to say too is, as I was listening to it with John that first time, I would always say to him, "Was that a sample?" And he would say, "There's no samples on this. Like, keyboards are keyboards, obviously, but everything is played," and I really enjoyed that.
What did John play on this? Like, what is it saying there?
Annalute.
He played the annalute.
Indian drum.
He played the Indian drum.
Moog synths.
The Moog synths.
What's that last thing there? Hot cherry pie. Horns, hot cherry pie, John. That's a lot. What are you doing here?
Nothing.
Where are you? Wait a second.
I didn't play nothing.
No, I guess not. You don't come into this album until the next
So there's
song.
another individual that played, one of the guitarists, Fred Guignon.
Yeah.
Did I pronounce that properly?
Guignon, yeah.
Yeah, so he was a super talented guy that played. What was the band he played in? He was played in a big band in Ottawa.
Oh, he's played in a lot of big bands.
But he played in one.
Oh shit!
You know what I'm talking about, eh?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should be doing my research for these episodes. I didn't know Byron would be pulling this shit out on.
Well, it's just interesting who played on and Fred was a big guitarist musician in the Ottawa community for many years.
Yeah, and he played in a disco cover band for what? Like he seems
did
to be
the Hammerheads.
Yes,
yes,
that's
played,
it.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah.
He seems to be a go-to guitar player around town. I see him quite a lot at Blues Fest, and fantastic player, really nice guy. And the other guitar player here, Derek Jeffries, he was a good friend of John's. He played in the Crayons.
Okay.
And he's an incredible guitar player, really nice guy.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
I haven't seen him in years.
I can't remember Derek Jeffries, but Fred's name is definitely.
Well, it was.
There's another band he was in, Fred. I know in the '90s.
He was. I know he plays. I think Rebecca Campbell's band too.
Yeah, well,
Rebecca Noel's band as well. She's sort of a more.
I was getting sort of that Blue Currant Preserve sort of area where we used to practice. Anyways, it was, wow.
Yeah.
I would say my favorite is listening to Tom play bass on this, and that he's pretty funked out there and stuff like that.
I mean, it's hitting home when you have such a good low end, a great drum track like that. It's a little awkward, but it's cool because of the way it's played. It's intentional, obviously intentional, but it's just that the bass and drums. I mean, how many times can you say it? Oh, the bass and drums in that song are great, but they truly are. Right through the whole album, it's great. It's interesting because Byron, what I consider, if someone said to me, well, what instrument does he play? I'd say bass. He's one of my favorite bass player, but a lot of this, you would also give that up to other people.
Happily, yeah. Absolutely. If they were available, and absolutely. I think on this track I just get to play organ and some clavinet.
The other thing is you'll hear in this song and all through the album, in the little spaces between the music, you hear voices, just people talking. Like there's always that English guy. Is that Ace, your guitar player Ace, that played on the album? He was English, right?
Yes, so there was a friend that John had that I think used to play in the Crayons. I might be wrong, but his name was Ace, and he was English. Now, of course, we've talked about this many times that comes from Spinal Tap. We love anything that's from the island across the ocean. And we would spend much of our time even talking in English accents because it was everything sounded Spinal Tap. Well, Ace was a real Brit, and we would phone him up from the studio when he was awake or when we knew he was awake, and we would record him on the phone because we just and Ace was the type of guy that could do a few impersonations. So he could do the Ponzi Prince Charles, which you can probably hear at some points, and he could do some sort of the Queen, sort of sounding like a Ponzi Queen, stuff like that. So yeah, I could not get enough of him, and he was right into it and stuff like that.
And a unique, like I don't know the guy, but listening to his like solos and. I think he did a totally different take on.
He played guitar on this album, I think. I
know he did.
Oh, okay, he did. Yeah.
I'm saying his lines are always like, that's bizarre, but it's brilliant. You know, like.
Yeah. Again,
guys that can interpret something in a way different way than you might think.
Yeah. Again, having somebody come in and just put their 2 cents into something. Yeah, I can already hear sort of the difference between me doing it all and having other people play on my stuff.
And, you know, a good editor. I thought John was really good at, I guess, going for his vision of, you know, his vision of what he's got to do for the song. Like,
yeah, so when I previous to my half hour, I talked about editing and stuff like that, and sort of that's from what I've heard about White Down Hard and sort of my preconceptions about this album. But upon listening to this song, I would have to agree with you. Yeah, it's not as bloated as I would have thought in my head because I haven't heard this in 20 years. So, yeah, how long is this song? Do we have? Is it about 3 minutes long? Is it less than 2 minutes? Yeah. If you get rid of all that Ponzi stuff at the start.
But that's what makes up a good Byronic song is that it just doesn't go intro, verse 2, bridge, chorus, verse 1, you know.
Yeah.
These songs are kind of journeys.
So this is meant to sit on your couch and just sort of take it all in, take in the weirdness.
Well, I think all of your stuff is really, it needs to be given a little room to breathe. Like when the whole mastering thing went from being dynamic and making quiet parts quiet and loud parts loud, it became to everything at, you know, at zero across the board all the time.
Yeah.
Your productions are dynamic, you know.
Well, I will say it's. I certainly look upon my stuff a lot differently when I have the lyrics in front of me, and I've been coming to this conclusion over the past few months, doing stuff presently and looking back, and I love the look of the words that I use on these songs. I think it helps me follow my songs along, and I hope it would. When people watch this, I hope they watch the lyrics as well. They're just
something funny about that. When you offer people up visual stimuli, they're much more likely to give it a chance.
Yeah. I think it's important that people. I don't know whether I enunciate properly or all that other stuff about singing, but I don't
think you're supposed to, though.
I think it's good that they see what that stuff looks like.
You know, it's the beauty you make up the words in your own head of what you're saying. Like, I know that you said salamander. I wasn't sure exactly just before that, even though I know it very well.
But I would say with a lot of pop stuff that I hear, I would say a lot of it, I'm not really interested in knowing what they have to say, other than because I can sort of pick it out that it's just sort of a lot of tropes that you hear there's a few people that I'm interested in hearing, but I'm interested in hearing what the hell those crazy words I put together. It's fun to sort of actually see the words.
So the other question,
like salamander, it looks wonderful. Like I'm sure
salamander is an awesome word.
Where the hell is that?
About it. Salamander, it's awesome. One thing I did want to ask, as like, you know, someone who works in the studio as well, is a lot of times the order the songs that you work on in the studio has a lot to do with the flow of the whole album. Would this one have been near the beginning of your work with John? What's the first song you think you did when you went in to start this album?
Was Tripnotic.
Freak of Nature.
Something like that, one of those two, yeah. But I think Tripnotic became very quickly like one of my favorites.
And that really, in the pacing of the album, is the last song.
Is it?
Yep. Before all the crazy empty space shit that we put in there.
Yeah, well, I remember doing For Me, I demoed it at John's first studio on Hawthorne, and I remember I aced my demo. Like, I just sang it, like, it made me so happy. And then there was the moment that on Tripnotic, that I had the phrase Tripnotic, which I thought was pretty sweet, Tripnotic. But then our friend John James put down a bass part that just about... but you put the drum part down to that song.
Well, that would make sense. That was the first song you worked with John, because I bet you that you and I would have been working around that stuff.
How did you get involved in that if you weren't in my space?
Because that's what I'm saying. It makes sense now, because you and I would have been working on that with the R8, and John James and I were starting to work together at Healy and in the Hooblers and all. And so I would, like using you, I would use John as bass player on some of my clients' stuff. And I'm pretty sure that because that was the first song that was like the umbilical cord over to John, that's what you wanted to do at that point is, I don't want to say a rap song or anything, but you wanted that element. And I had a few of those hip hop beats, and you just said, well, let's just use that one. And I kind of wrote a few other beats to it. We wanted to stay true to the hip hop thing, so it never really moves from that.
But you never came over that...
No, John went over on his own. Being a huge introvert, that was a big thing for John to go over on his own to work with you and John Dewar. And so he went over with my drum track. And so that would make sense, but it's the last song we'll be listening to on the album.
That's right. Okay, that was it. All right.
Anyway, so that's your introduction to Alien, the Rabbit, and the Monkey.
Woo-woo.
Pretty fun. We got lots more to come. Songs, people, situations, because this is the album where everything in life seems to happen at one fell swoop.
Yeah.